So hi everybody, welcome to the 4th annual Goodyear Presentations in World History. Thanks for being here to support your classmates. Everybody in this room contributed to the success of tonight's program as you all gave presentations and you were all part of this. So I'd like to thank you on behalf of the HPRSS department for all of your hard work. The Goodyear contest is named for the late Zachary Goodyear, a former HPRSS colleague who worked at Choate for over 40 years. Mr. Goodyear inspired Choate students in many ways in his many years here. As a teacher, advisor, editor, political observer, and media critic. Mr. Goodyear set the gold standard for public speaking as he was the creator of Spate. Tonight, our 4 presenters are going to give their speeches in alphabetical order, and we're going to start with Ariel Kim. So a little background on Ariel first. So Ariel is a boarder. She currently resides in McCook, but she's originally from Seoul, South Korea. Her previous school was the Korea International School. Her favorite topic in world history is ancient civilizations. And her fun fact is that she's actually trilingual. She can speak English, Korean, and Chinese pretty fluently, which is pretty cool. The faculty advisor for her presentation is Miss Okra, and the title of her speech is The Black Death, the Foundation of Modernity.
25 million people dead. More than 60% of the entire European population gone. These are just some of the devastating consequences of the horrendous Black Death. Originating in China in 1334, then spreading along the trade routes to Constantinople and finally to Europe, the Black Death wiped out tens of thousands of people a day. While the Black Death seems simply to have wreaked havoc across the whole world during the Middle Ages, I will introduce to you today a distinctive perspective on this issue, one that celebrates the Black Death as a turning point in history. My argument is that the Black Death is the foundation of modernity. It led to the collapse of feudalism and started the decline of religious authority, which consequently led to European hegemony. So what characterizes modernity? Modernity can be characterized with several key characteristics that can be contrasted directly with those from society during the Middle Ages. These include mobility, secularization, and Western or European dominance. Keeping these key characteristics in mind, now we will analyze how the Black Death led to these changes. The Black Death sped up the changes in Europe's economic and social structure feudalism, which was an organized system where people of higher social classes would guarantee a certain amount of power or land in return for tax or protection. This social system was a very rigid one. It prevented social mobility of any kind and also any intellectual or educational development. The Black Death, which had wiped out much of the peasant class, caused the serf class to become very valued to the noble class, which now lacked a stable and strong worker base. According to The Economist, a reaper was not to be hired for less than 8 pence a day. Farm wages stayed far above past levels. Healthy working serfs were able to request for more rights and more power, demonstrating an increase in social mobility. According to the Smithsonian, the entire structure of feudalist society, which had been under stress for many years, was undermined by the plague. The plague ravaged the weakened feudal system from so many diverse and unpredictable quarters and tore it apart. The Black Death also caused a decline of religious authority. People used to believe that priests and people of the church were of the holy kind and were immune to diseases like the Black Plague. However, as even those who were the most faithful to God started dying out, people began to lose trust in the power of the church. According to Henry Knighton, an English historian who had chronicled the Black Death while it was spreading, the king of Tharsis set out, intending to seek out the Pope at Avignon and have himself baptized as a Christian, believing the vengeance of God to have overtaken his people due to his sinful disbelief. But when he heard along the road that the plague had invaded the ranks of the people of the Christians, he turned about to go back to his own country. The holy people of the church were powerless against this evil pestilence. In fact, the mortality rate for priests during the Black Death was 42 to 45%, as many of them were repeatedly exposed to the plague after moving from home to visit the dying. This is how the transition towards secularization and disenchantment of the world began. The Black Death, which had visibly proven to the people that priests and monks did not actually possess holy power, was the turning point in the people's view toward religion. Well before the plague struck Europe, the role of the Catholic Church in Western Europe had been changing. The Black Death dealt the Church a further blow, for along with renewed fear and the need for new religious zeal came the opposite feeling, that the Church itself had failed. As the Black Death waned in Europe, the power of religion waned with it, leaving behind a population that was gradually but certainly turning its attention toward the physical realm in which it lived, to materialism and to worldliness. The collapse of feudalism and the decline of religious authority were two important factors that led to European dominance. Before feudalism collapsed and before religious authority declined, the single most powerful authority in Europe was the Pope, who had absolute power over the monarchs and the people. People not only believed that the Pope had holy power and connection to God, but were forced into a system that required them to serve the Church. However, after the Church's power was diminished and feudalism collapsed, monarchs and their people no longer were dominated by the Pope socially, politically, nor religiously. Monarchs ruled over their own countries and competed against one another to develop arms and new navigational technology. With the sudden surge in development in Europe and their new ability to trade with countries around the world, as well as their powerful economies backed by their numerous colonies, Europe became the center of the world. One might even say that the world became Europe. European ideas, goods, and people were spread all over the globe through colonies and trade, heavily influencing and changing countless cultures. The effects of the Black Death were devastating. Yet by causing the decline of feudalism and religious authority in Europe, the Black Death was able to help Europe and the world transition into increased mobility, secularization, and Western dominance. In other words, modernity. Thank you.
Our second presenter today is Siri Palaretti. Siri is a day student, and her hometown is Avon, Connecticut. Her previous school was AAE, the Academy of Aerospace and Engineering. Her favorite topic in history is about women's suffrage. And her fun fact is that the main reason she decided to come to Choate was for the waffles, which is pretty awesome. The faculty advisor for her presentation was me, and her title is Chit Chat to Culture, the Parisian Salon's Effect on Women.
Chit Chat to Culture, the Parisian Salon's Effect on Women. History is full of the greatest minds the world has ever encountered. From those of the European Enlightenment period, such as the philosopher Jean-Jacques Rousseau, Joseph Black, who discovered carbon dioxide, and even the Montgolfier brothers, who made the first successful hot balloon flight. However, what is common between these men is that they are all men. So today I'd like to delve into what we so commonly miss from our history textbooks: the woman, specifically the woman of the Enlightenment's Parisian salons. By examining the role of the salon in the time of Europe's Enlightenment, one can see that it was a crucial space for the women of Europe, particularly in France. With the salon, women were allowed to interact with men as equals. They were provided a safe refuge for intellectual discussion, and they also formed a strong sisterhood that would later be influential in how women should be viewed and involved in society. When most people hear the word salon, they think of a barbershop. However, the Enlightenment salon had a much greater role. The salon started off as an intellectual gathering at the house of a distinguished woman in society. Men were sometimes invited, but women, in contrast to the rest of history, dominated. Philosophy, politics, literature, and more were discussed, and the discussion was guided by the woman of the house. Before the introduction of the salon, women were nothing more than childbearers and pleasure items of men, sex objects. As Rousseau said, a woman's purpose was to please men, to be useful to them, to make herself loved and honored by them, to make their lives agreeable and sweet. These are the duties of women at all times. But salons ensured that not everyone bought into this. In fact, Benjamin Franklin, when traveling to France as U.S.'s ambassador, visited a multitude of salons. And in a letter to Mrs. Partridge on October 11, 1770, he wrote, "The French ladies have, however, 1,000 other ways of rendering themselves agreeable by their various attentions, civilities, and their sensible conversation. How the French women of the salons presented themselves to Franklin made an impact on him, showing him that women were capable of being more than pretty faces, that they could and should be able to use their brains as well without fear of prosecution from misogynists. The salons also let a woman's ideas be heard. Women then were not allowed to publish anything, write anything, or contradict men in any way. Education for them was thought of as the Bible and learning to be a good mother. Salons created a level platform where women could speak their minds and not be prejudiced solely because of their sex. To be the head of a salon, a salonier, one had to be knowledgeable in literature, philosophy, and the arts. This on its own gave a form of education to women, something better than just being literate. Since the salons are mostly composed of females, women found themselves in company that related to their want of knowledge, instead of putting them down like other men, such as Nicholas Malebranche, who said, "Old things of an abstracting nature are incomprehensible to them, woman." But this did not stop the women, such as Madame Geoffrin, from hosting salons, her own being called one of the wonders of the social world by Longman magazine, as a united woman who would never have been able to come together before. Madame Geoffrin was the one who switched the time of the salon dinner from late night to 1 o'clock, allowing for more discussion time. She also structured a weekly salon schedule, which all salons then adopted, and on weekends would do charity work. And although these may not seem like significant achievements, Madame Geoffrin's actions proved women could effectively wield authority. Her decisions affected all the men who attended her popular salon, leading to recognition of female leadership. Madame Geoffrin's accomplishments show that, as Dina Goodman, historian, quotes, "The Enlightenment was not a game." And the saloniers were not simply ladies of leisure killing time. On the contrary, Enlightenment saloniers were precisely those people who fought the general melee of the period by taking up their métier. Other than Madame Geoffrin, women like Madame du Deffand and Madame de Staël held up the salon, kept true to its revolutionary purpose. But the salon didn't just end in Paris. It spread, branching out into a network of European ladies far more empowered than before. In England, for instance, the Blue Stocking Society, coined by Elizabeth Montagu, became the name for those women who dared to learn. The sisterhood formed throughout Europe during the Enlightenment, encouraging women to stand up for their equal gender rights, to learn if they wanted to, and to find support in other women. The salon was the start of all that. It was the spark that ignited movements for women to earn a college degree, to vote, to have control over what they brought into this world. Women were once regarded as less than human beings, but the salons of France and the remarkable women who used them show that women truly do have a place in the enlightened society. Thank you.
Our third presenter is Medina Purefoy Craig. She is a boarder at Choate and she resides in Arch, and her hometown is Orange, New Jersey. Her previous school was the Link Community Charter School located in Newark, New Jersey. Her favorite topic in history is anything dealing with the French or the Renaissance. A fun fact is that she is a member of the arts concentration and she's also an actor. Her faculty advisor was Mr. Bacon, and the title of her speech is The Industrial Revolution and Racial Discrimination.
You can call me bitter, but I would be lying if I said that the world we live in hadn't been designed to see me fail. If anything, racial discrimination is at the heart of one of the most successful and ongoing revolutions, the Industrial Revolution. Let's take a look. If we want to find where racial discrimination was happening, look no further than the workforce. For African Americans either got the jobs that required the most extreme of labors or the domestic jobs with extreme tediousness. It should also come to no surprise that Black lives were not valued. So out of all these extremes, they were also placed in jobs where the fatality rates were the highest. And let us not forget that at this time, it seems like every white man's nightmare was a Negro that could read. For if you could read, you could write. And if you could write, you would be on your way to patenting your own inventions. The dawn of industrialization brought with it a new face of racial discrimination and a new kind of bondage. Before we can get into racial discrimination shown in the workplace, we have to acknowledge that there weren't many job opportunities in the first place. This was due to nothing else than harmful stereotypes and the desire to keep a whole race of people from achieving anything worthwhile. Blacks either got a job because of a harmful stereotype or they didn't get a job because of the same stereotype. In 1881, we have a Nashville cotton manufacturer that hired an all-white workforce because the employers argued blacks were incapable of mastering work on machinery and that the whirring of the machines would put blacks to sleep. A trend that seemingly carried over from slavery was that anything with an excessive amount of labor was to be placed on blacks. The jobs given to them entailed disproportionate exposure to debilitating heat, deadly fumes, and disabling injuries, and even death. Somehow, this community was able to decide that black people were inferior to them, yet able to withstand more than the average person. This was a good example of the mindset in Philadelphia and in eastern Pennsylvania, where employers presumably hired black women in glass factories, where at times bits of broken glass were flying in all directions because of their ability to stand the heat without suffering. Or in mines, where the circulation of air or no air would be so bad, you'd have to wait sometimes up to 2 hours before you could go back in there and load any coal, where people had been sick and dizzy off that smoke many times, that deadly poison in there. It would knock you out too, make you weak as water. Along with these dangerous situations, there were also dangerous expectations. As quoted, "Over where I work in the dye factory, they expect more from a colored girl if she is to keep her job. They won't give a colored girl a break." Despite having to work in the less glorious positions of industrial work, African Americans were able to create tools and machines that would help them. The Industrial Revolution was dripping with opportunities to create. However, with racial discrimination, it was nearly impossible for blacks to patent their own inventions. Since the U.S. Patent Act of 1836 required inventors to submit models showing the precise construction, design, and specification of their innovations, literacy restrictions denied African Americans significant channels to technical knowledge as well as patents for their innovations. And if not being able to read or write wasn't enough, following the U.S. Supreme Court's Dred Scott decision of 1857, the federal government ruled that bondsmen were not citizens of the Republic and therefore could not receive patents for their inventions, though some didn't let that stop them. There were plenty of free black people who had some level, however small, of an education. Granville Wood, for example, who was nicknamed the Black Edison, was subjected to legal challenges from the actual Edison, in which Thomas Edison challenged his claims to authenticity. Why tell you all of this? Well, at some point in time, after being put down again and again, people will stand up for themselves. And this is what gave birth to things like the Brotherhood of Sleeping Car Porters, the first African-American labor union. And despite the laws and emerging Jim Crow, there were some inventors that were able to receive patents for their works. Madam C.J. Walker was able to transform her hair products into $1 million enterprise. And yes, that shows that black people can be hopeful for a future where they will actually be equal with everyone else. But why is that important to know? Why is it important for everyone to know this bit of history? Well, because it's history. It's memory, and it's all already happened. And the closing of our eyes can't alter that. We have to be aware of our past and our histories, no matter our race. I can only hope that by making you all aware of this history, we can all make sure it never happens again. Thank you.
Our last presenter is William Robertson. Will is a boarder, and he currently resides in Hill. His hometown is Lynchburg, Virginia, and he previously went to the James River Day School. His favorite topic in history is ancient history, specifically ancient Rome and ancient Egypt. And for a fun fact, he's actually named after British royalty. His faculty advisor is Miss Okra, and the title of his speech is Marxism and Income Inequality.
Since the beginnings of civilization, there has been an ongoing moral and academic debate as to how to achieve utopia here on Earth. How we should run things, which systems we should have, what truly is the best style of government. There have been many who have devoted their lives to analyzing this question, but there are a few which rest in the pantheon of the greatest philosophers. One of these is Karl Marx, whose Marxist theory has taken main stage throughout history and played a role of specific importance immediately after the Industrial Revolution. Marx was born in 1818 in Prussia and grew up in a cultured and liberal household surrounded with books and art from an early age. After having already run into trouble with Prussian authorities on account of his radically liberal ideas, his reputation also grew on behalf of the publication he co-wrote, the Communist Manifesto, which gained him international fame, or, in some cases, infamy. One of the main purposes of the text was to try to reduce social inequality, but ended up doing just the opposite. The publication of the ideas of Marxism through the Communist Manifesto ended up having little to none of the desired effect of reducing income inequality between the working and the ruling classes in Europe because of the inapplicability to daily life and the prominent lack of education throughout the working class. Although it contained searingly radical and energizing ideas, the Communist Manifesto failed to account for the struggles of the common people and eventually completely lost traction within society. Marx was raised in a well-off family and therefore likely found it difficult to keep in mind the struggles of the proletariat. Marx's theories focused an extraordinary amount on radicalized ideas such as a personal and thorough commitment to revolution. And although this may have been a good idea in theory, he forgot that the vast majority of the working class simply didn't have the time or energy to pursue his seemingly manic vision. Most of the proletarians at that point in history were far too focused on simply providing for their families. And it likely took everything they had in them just to keep their families safe and well each day. For example, if we look at the chart here, we can see a weighted scale representing the rise in prices from 1550 to 1799, the period of time before Marxism blossomed. Although in some areas the wages did increase, it still left common people chasing necessities with a startling lack of financial security. A simple way to explain why this caused Marxism to die out is to look at Maslow's hierarchy of needs, a chart made by the psychologist Abraham Maslow in order to explain the ranking of human necessities. As we can see, things such as food, water, and sleep are at the very bottom of the pyramid, while things such as security, friendship, confidence, and morality are nearer the top. The idea of this chart is that you can't achieve a level of necessity without being secure in all those below. Therefore, the blue-collar workers of the Industrial Revolution couldn't have possibly been able to invest their concern into political and philosophical ideas, the top tier, when they were still insecure at the most basic level, with items such as food never being guaranteed. Because of this, although many lower-class workers liked and appreciated the ideas presented in the Communist Manifesto, Marxism ended up drowning amidst the more pressing matters of the proletariat. In addition, a lack of education among the poor was partially to blame for the stifling of Marxist ideas. Although education did improve after the Industrial Revolution, compared to the present day, the rates of education then were significantly lower. This was closely linked to the rampant poverty at the time. Many children had to work in the Industrial Revolution in order to help provide for their families, which left them unable to go to school. For example, we can look at this chart, which shows the rate of illiteracy during the Industrial Revolution. Although there was an increase in literacy from the years prior to the Industrial Revolution, in the year 1800, only 53% of British adults could sign their name, not even to touch on countries such as Spain and Poland, which had literacy rates of closer to 20%. In addition, these statistics count those who can sign their name. It's safe to assume that an even lower percent were able to read what is considered the standard today. Marx, like many other German philosophers of the time, used incredibly complex language designed to entrance and perplex the mind. Without a completed formal education, it would have been nearly impossible for many of the common people to read, much less argue, the ideas Marx proposes within the Communist Manifesto. Thus, Marx suffered another oversight. He wrote his text in scholarly language, forgetting that he wasn't writing for scholars. Through historical context and statistics, we've been able to unravel Marx's efforts with the very thing which he used to construct them, logic. However, don't get me wrong, this is not to say that the ideas within Marxism aren't potent. If the Communist Manifesto were just another Mad Hatter ranting his ideas, it wouldn't have amassed the kind of mass academic discussion that it has. Although it didn't work well at the time, I believe that was solely a situational error. When placed in another scenario with more hospitable givens, it would likely work, and it did on a few occasions in the future, most famously in the Soviet Union. Marx's thought was almost genius, and he could have succeeded in his aspirations, if only he were more observant of where he was. Thank you.
So the judges are going to do their deliberations, and the winner will be announced at either the next form meeting or the next all-school meeting. We'll see how that all shakes out, depending on if we get time or if we don't. But we'll go from there, all right? Bye, everybody. Thank you for coming.